I wanted to make another analysis video about Pluribus before the finale came out, but I have run out of time because it's coming out tonight. So I'm just going to say a few things that the last episode made me think about, and then end with thoughts on the dominant theory of what's going to happen at the end of the next episode. In the previous episode, we watched Carol and Zosia kind of face off against each other in a series of what could be perceived as dates that maybe were under the guise of dates, but were Zosia trying to charm Carol and trying to distract her and trying to win her over, and Carol trying to get closer to the hive, both for personal reasons because she was so starved for personal attention, and also learning more about the hive and therefore how to take them down. Not take them down, but how to save humanity and separate people back out from the hive. So the two things that I thought about during these various dates, or I kind of think of them as tests, were human fallibility and preferences. So human fallibility, first, in the sense that when Carol needed to think about an activity to do with Zosia, she had to think about, what can I do with a supercomputer that the supercomputer is not just going to easily defeat me at? And she couldn't play chess, of course, because Zosia has the memory of all the chess players in the world at the time of the joining. So she chose Spit, which is a game that has an element of randomness, but also an element of reflexes. And we know that, the Pluribus are in human bodies, so they have the limitations of a human body, and assuming that the original Zosia didn't have perfect reflexes as a person, then, that was a good bet of a game that they could play together that Carol would actually have some chance of beating the hive at. And I think that's interesting because I think it points to the way that one could think about taking down the hive, which is to think about the weaknesses of being within a human body. Because as much as the combined knowledge of all humans is a superpower and comes with a lot of intelligence and a lot of awareness, the Pluribus are still inside of humans. And I think that's meaningful. In the same vein, Zosia and Carol went to massages together, which taught us that the hive may know everything about what happens to each other intellectually, but they don't experience everything that happens to everyone, which I think is an important distinction and could be something that's used in the future against the hive, because it gives Zosia more of a sense of individuality, even as a part of the hive, than maybe we thought of her before, because every experience that this Zosia has, even though she's a part of the hive and everybody knows what happens to her, all those experiences are still her own, and she's the only one who has the qualities of those experiences. I think it's possible that that's meaningful. So an emotional quality or a physical quality is hers and hers alone. I'm not sure exactly why Carol chose croquet as the game to play against Zosia. Maybe Carol thought that croquet doesn't have very much intellectual skill. I think it was proven that knowing about croquet does give you an advantage, even if you've never physically played it before. It was a good try, I guess. But anyway, the fallibility of the Pluribus is existing in a human body comes with all of the human error of that physical body. So there's an element of perfection and perfect organization and perfect recall and perfect knowledge that comes with having all of the knowledge of everyone who existed at the time of the joining. It's not perfect, actually, as the game of Spit demonstrated, because nobody alive at the time of the joining knew the origin of the name Spit, because it's lost to time and nobody can actually trace the Spit back to the first person who called it that, which I think is a funny detail. But the collective knowledge of all the humans at the time of the joining is certainly one of their superpowers, and it is interesting that Carol was able to test the extent to which that doesn't extend to the physical body. and the qualities of that physical body's experiences, which also makes me think that it's a lot more fun to be a chaperone to a human than to be any of the other jobs given by the Pluribus, but they don't seem to care about that. And then on to preferences, and this is probably why they don't care about that. Preferences, I was thinking about preferences from the first moment that Carol served Zosia pink lemonade, because Carol asked Zosia if the lemonade needed more water. Zosia didn't have a preference. She wanted to satisfy Carol, so she told Carol that it was perfect, and a human person without the Pluribus's influence would probably have an opinion. They might also be a people pleaser and not state that opinion, but they probably would have one, and the Pluribus people don't. Either because they have the combined average of all people's preferences, which is maybe that everything is fine, or because they just don't have them intellectually anymore, because there's a lot of things that the Pluribus changed about people's intellectual state and the sort of choices that they can make and the fact that they can't lie and whatever. Zosia didn't have a preference on what game they would play, but she was just trying to satisfy Carol. Zosia was fascinated by Carol's preference for train horns, which was a cute scene. And also just I know that the Pluribus was trying to trick Carol with charming her and distracting her and making her like them. But at the same time, I wanted to believe Zosia's fascination with Carol's preference and what is it about train horns? I thought that was a really interesting thing, because the quality of something is what the Pluribus is missing from each other. They don't get to learn that through their psychic connection. And so the what it is is really interesting to Zosia. I guess on preferences, you could also talk about their love of Waikaro, but I just feel like that's a little, and they just have all the Waikaro fans inside of them, which does take away from my idea that they have the average of all preferences, because they would probably also have the preference against Waikaro and maybe even stronger than the preference for it within them, but they seem to have eaten negative emotions, so maybe that just doesn't apply. The haters don't apply. I'm sure there's other examples of preference coming up in the episode, but of course the most interesting one is when Carol asks Zosia if she likes omelets, and Zosia says we like all breakfast foods. And Carol's like, no, I want to know if Zosia likes omelets. Zosia says, well, Zosia, the original Zosia, never really got a chance to have very many omelets, but yes, I like omelets. And then we get the anecdote from Zosia about mango ice cream, which a lot of people have been describing as kind of a break in the Pluribus facade, and then maybe we're accessing a bit of the Zosia underneath the surface. I feel really hesitant to kind of say that's what's going on. I don't think we're breaking anything to access that memory from Zosia. I think it's accessible to this body, and I think I would rather think of it as we're learning about where that version of Zosia exists within the Pluribus and how to access it, rather than it being a glitch, it just being a function. I find that more interesting, but I could be wrong. So I think it's very human to have a fallibility, to have failures, to have mistakes be a part of how you're built, and then to have preferences. I think that culturally people have preferences. I think as a survival instinct, people have preferences. And I think the Pluribus has done away with preferences, either because their preference is the average of everything that people liked before the joining, or they're able to access the joy of liking absolutely everything within the Pluribus, and maybe it's more that one, because they don't really seem to access haters. The Pluribus doesn't have preferences, but the people have preferences, and somewhere, I think, within the physical person of Zosia lies the preference for mango ice cream. And I think the intellectual recall of that preference, I don't think that's a crack in the armor. I don't think that is a break in the Pluribus mind situation, but I think perhaps the experience of mango ice cream could be, and I think that's interesting. So on the dominant theories of like what's going to happen in this next episode that's coming out in a matter of hours. So we heard in episode 8 that the radio signal of the hive mind happens like autonomically, like breathing, and that it doesn't happen in the form of speech or words, but more like in the form of just understanding. And I feel like one of the dominant theories is that like Zosia is going to be brought to a place where the signal doesn't reach. It's sort of like she has no Wi-Fi signal, so she just can't reach it, and that's going to disconnect Zosia from the rest of the hive. Either that or like Carol and Manousos are going to come up with something, some frequency to like jam the hive mind signal. Getting rid of the signal will cause Zosia to divide from the hive. They'll end on a scene where she is like her individual self, and she won't be able to speak English anymore, and will be kind of in a room with Manousos and Zosia and Carol, who like now can no longer communicate because they don't have the Pluribus to like translate for them. And I said it before and I'll say it again, I just don't think that the most interesting version of this story is that we'll end the connection to the hive and it will be like it never happened. The show has explored so much about what it is to be human and what it is to be a collective and what it is to like be an individual. And if they just kind of separate her out like a laptop that's not connected to the internet and they just like put her in a lead box and then she's just disconnected and she's back to normal, I don't know, I just don't really know what that says about humanity. You're just a robot that can be connected to Wi-Fi. You can just be hacked. Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know what that would say. Sure, maybe they can hit that plot point and write it well and it will mean something, but I think I would be disappointed still if like the ending of the episode is that we're gonna disconnect Zosia from the hive like Wi-Fi and then she's a person again. It's just, that seems too easy. I've seen other theories that it's like gonna have to do with emotions and that something will happen to Zosia that causes an emotional reaction, much like Carol's anger short-circuiting the Pluribus, and that perhaps the Waikaro chapter or love or something will short-circuit Zosia, causing her disconnection. I mean, I think that version of it has a little more meaning, and maybe if it's done well, it could be done well. I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope that when Zosia is disconnected, because I do think Zosia will be disconnected, I hope that there's continuity of character. I think she'll lose something, and it might be her ability to speak English, but I hope that she still remembers what happened to her and the choices that she made while she was a part of the hive, like as if she had joined a cult and, you know, she knows why she joined the cult and she knows the choices that she made while she was in the cult, and maybe she would like make different choices now that she's out of it. But I don't love the idea that she just forgets, because we're saying so much about what is essential about being human. And if a human went through all of those experiences, sure, maybe they would block them out like a trauma. But I don't love that the idea that they were just invaded and then that invasion left and they're back to square one, like from before. Yeah, I mean, I guess I really think the quality of things that happen to you, the what it is like, is so essential to the story. It's something that even the Pluribus experiences as an individual. And if Zosia comes out the other end of this without the what it is like to have been in the Pluribus, I don't know. It's just like, what was the point? So we'll see. Don't disappoint me.